Okay, welcome to our last MOOC, OceanMOOC live question and answer session. We've been delighted with the level of participation that you've had within the MOOC, and this is going to be a rather special session. We have two participants of the MOOC joining Martin Visbeck and myself, and we're looking forward to hearing what people who've taken the MOOC have to tell us. So I hope many of you will still log in and fire away your questions. Let me just go through our participants today. We have Dr. Michael White from the Cook Islands. Michael is a marine zoologist, have been living on the Cook Island for the last 25 years or so, studying endangered species, turtles, and lives very happily, I think I can say, with indigenous people and cultures on the Cook Island. We have Dr. Martin Bohle, whose research, he's a physical oceanography, and his research interests link the geosciences with society. And two very fascinating topics I picked up were the notion of geoethics and geohumanities, which perhaps he'll tell us a little bit about. Martin Visbeck is a physical oceanographer, and I think all of us from the MOOC know him well from his lectures. So let me just ask everybody to say a word about what they think now at the end of this OceanMOOC, the messages are that they would like to take. Michael, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Evan. One of the things I'd like to try and come out of this work today is to find some future way of staying connected with other participants around the world. So whatever forum that fits into, but maybe we can go that way. And then how, of course, we reach a sustainable, healthy ocean.
Thank you. We have two Martins, so we'll start with Martin Bohle.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here. I'm really surprised to got the invitation to this question and answer session. It was 1975 to 80 that I studied physical oceanographer at the Institute in Kiel, and I took this course more as a refresher. Now, it's 25 years in science management, and I'm moving now out of that and building a next step of what I would like to do in life. So this MOOC was for me about learning, refreshing, expanding know-how, and I learned quite a lot of things, and I'm very happy to take up the questions which will come up this evening for our local times, knowing that's morning on Mike's side.
Okay, thank you. Martin?
Yes, sure. So welcome back to all of you to another live Q&A session. I think this Google Hangout question session has been a very important part of our global learning exercise with the massive open online course on ocean and ocean sustainability. I've been just as excited this year as I was last year when we ran the MOOC for the first time about the level of engagement of the global ocean community. We have so many exciting comments in the forum. We have so many interesting people watching the lectures, asking questions and engaging. And I think this time in particular, we would focus on sort of what's next for you and for us, on issues, how we might be able to stay in touch, how we can take the things we have learned in the MOOC together forward in thinking about the ocean-human interface and how humanity can maybe a bit more responsible interact with the ocean in general, and what avenues we have along those lines at the level of science, at the level of individuals, at the level of organizations. And so I'm looking quite forward to your questions and comments in that regard, or anything else that you might have. But it's been an exciting time, and I think we had a great team supporting the MOOC, so I was very happy about that. So I'm very much looking forward to that possibility to engage with you and your questions in more real-time fashion. And certainly having two participants with Avan and I today makes it even more exciting to hear from their perceptions and their ideas and their views, how we can take this agenda forward.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I think looking forward is really what we want to do. We had a wonderful, so let me just interrupt to say we have now Several people online. There's Eva from Kiel, there's Ajit Raj from Bangalore, there's Shevli from West Bengal, with several lovely questions coming up. And one question that was sent in advance, which was from Shevli, who's joining us right now, I think was particularly nice to set off the session. She says, I would be particularly interested in seeing what the ocean would look like in 2050. In particular, if we could turn around the disastrous events leading to pollution and dead coastal areas. So I think this is, before we start going into actions, maybe very shortly, a vision of what the ocean might look like in 2050 if we could turn the tide. Martin Bohle, would you like to take that up?
Okay, I try to take it up. I think when we look at what we have learned and when we take the questions which came in, there are two items which come first to my mind. The first one is overfishing, the status of the fish population in the global oceans. And the second is the situation in the coastal seas. And there the aspect which are mostly determined by the run from the life which we have on land. On both sides, I see that we have the know-how. It has to be changed in order to reduce overfishing. We have the know-how enhanced. What has to be changed in order to reduce pollution coming from land? At first instance, I would say the nutrient influence and the plastic which is floated in the sea. And we face on all three issues basically a governance question. Whether the different actors which regionally, locally, topically discuss measures, try to get things changed, and they have to be networked. And I would say from here to 2050, which is 35 years, this is half a lifetime of a human being, we have well the chance to reduce tide and get a coastal zone in which dead zones is an exception. Coastal zones in which the biosphere is in a state as how, and also have a chance to get some of the fish populations in the open ocean into better shape, if we have not pushed them beyond the tipping point, as it seems to be for the cod of no, populations do not build up again.
Thank you. Michael, what would your vision of the ocean in 2050 be if we could turn the tide?
Okay, well, the big question is, can we turn the tide? So we just look at human population as one factor. We're expecting about 10 billion people by 2050. So everybody wants things, everybody wants business as usual. It would be about a healthy, diverse and abundant ecosystem. So we have problems with fisheries, as Martin just said. I don't see much improvement. So I look at quotas of fisheries, but I still see we're emptying the ocean. I know what happened with the Grand Banks when the cod fishery collapsed. They said, okay, we'll stop fishing for a year and it'll all recover. 10, 15 years later, it hadn't. And so what they realized with that was it's not just the quantity of the fish, but it's the quality of the fish as well. And so if you're trying to rebuild the population from effectively the weakest animals, you're not going to succeed. And then the second thing is plastics. So ocean plastics, you know, I mean, my island, I'm far from any place, but the entire coastal zone and the forest are full of consumer goods. We're not a cash economy, so we haven't got shops. None of the stuff has come from us. It's all from the industrial world's consumerism. You know, it's like shampoo bottles, lighters, shoes, bottle top, plastic. Recently, I looked at all of the drinking water bottles, and they're coming from the North Pacific garbage patch and the South Pacific garbage patch. So I'm as far away as Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Philippines, California, Hawaii, Fiji, you name it, we have a plastic bottle there. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Martin, tell us about your vision of the ocean in 35 years. It seems we have lost Martin.
Yeah, it's good.
I hear most of you.
Okay, you're back on, Martin.
Okay, so to me, the ocean of the future is an interesting proposition. What would it look like in 20 or 50 years? I think collectively it's our choice how we interact with the ocean system. Certainly we heard the fishing challenge. In my view, there's a lot of reasons why overfishing happens. On the one hand, on the consumer side, people are just not aware that it's happening, that it's a bit of consumer choice. On the other hand, there's a lot of economic interest in fisheries and maybe too many subsidies for fisheries that makes it difficult to turn the tide. So it's again an active part on the more developed nations and their financial politics around it. Then we heard about some of the other pollutants like plastic, but I also want to bring into the issue of climate and its interaction with the ocean. The sea level is rising, and that is due to the CO2 that we have in the atmosphere, which changes the atmospheric heat balance and warms our planet, in particular warms the ocean, which leads to sea level rise. And that is, for example, a change that will happen over the next 50 years, even if we would stop adding any CO2 today, because we have committed to a lot of change going into the future. But to me, the biggest challenge is the ocean that I remember is certainly nowhere near what the pristine ocean used to be, say in the Baltic or North Sea from our areas of Germany. So these changes are very subtle, step by step, and we seem to not seeing them because they're happening so suddenly. But then when you look back 50 years, we notice here in the Baltic that the big codfish, which was more than a meter or meter 50 long, they're just not available anymore. So these slow changes really have dramatic effects on the long run, and getting that in our short-term memory and our action-oriented thinking is very hard. And I think it takes collective action, collective thinking how to do that. And to me, I'm really looking to the MOOC participants, to all of us, to see what would be good models to get that across. But in general, I do think that there's more awareness around ocean, that there's less willingness to accept a pollutant and non-healthy ocean. How we can turn this into action is something that we need to discuss and think about. I know it is possible. When you look at, for example, the environmental status of Germany, all of our rivers used to be enormously polluted. They were so polluted you could not swim in them because they were toxic and dangerous. And all of the German rivers are now swimmable. They're a lot less toxic because we got our act together to clean them up. That's a little easier with the river than the ocean, but it just shows you when you want to change and you have the society behind you and you have rules and regulations that support that, we can put change into place. And to me, that is the big question to all of us. How can we do it and what can we do it? And I brought my fan t-shirt here for the SDG 14. And I think that's what the SDG 14 is all about, to really think about how we can change our human action versus the ocean to really arrive at a pristine, healthy, and productive ocean also for the next generation.
Okay, I'm going to show off my t-shirt. Not to be undone. I'm echoing somewhere. Never mind. Let's pick up what Martin Bohle started to talk about. You did speak about governance, Martin, and Ajit Raj, who's now joining us live from Bangalore, says, what effective step should we take to bring new governance regimes for strangling species and global marine commons? Now, you are at the European Commission, and presumably you've dealt with this quite a bit. What would you say to him?
Thanks for the expectations, what my work content could bring in, but it is not on that. But certainly I have a view on governance structures and what is possible and what is not possible to do. look on the existing structures, it would be not my conclusion that we lack there. They are staying, for example, in the fisheries field. There are a lot of multilateral, be them regional, be they out of area for some industrial countries, but many states are involved in, applies to deep sea mining. The same applies to regional setting. I think the problem is that these different actors have to, say, cooperate better, but they have to sing more from a common hymn sheet. They have to get more a common set of values which they are willing to consider beyond their own local interest. For example, European fisheries of West Africa, where we're doing a disastrous job. Or so the question is, what can be delivered in order to give the people who work in these structures this common hymn shield? And there's certainly more public understanding about the ocean and the world ocean necessary. The ocean has, to put it simple, a visibility problem away for many, even for those who live in the coast. And when you look on the ocean, it's opaque. You just see the surface. You do not see what happens below the surface. So these online course where we're participating in is one means in order to raise awareness, to raise understanding. And what is on the T-shirt of Martin and Avan is very important also. I think this is an important achievement which was met in relatively to the end of when the international organization agreed on the sustainable development goals to bring the marine goal in. And I think that is the way forward. So not new structures, working in order that the existing structures cooperate better with each other, that they know about each other, that they understand each other. So networking the existing things in, let's call this an ecosystem of governance.
Thank you, Martin. Martin Visbeck, I know that you've often criticized the piecemeal approach to ocean governance. What would you be, maybe you have an example of something that is getting beyond that, or what would you bring to that?
Well, I think it's a great question. And indeed, Martin Bohle correctly said, there's a lot of elements of governance pieces, ocean governance and other governance, which have an impact on human-ocean interactions, which, if used correctly, if actually acted upon, enforced, and put into place or into action, I think we can make a great step forward. But it is true that currently at the UN level, at the EU level, but also at the German level, when you look at ocean governance, it usually comes in many sectors and forms. And let's start with the UN because it's the most international body there. There is no one agency or no one person or no one group at the United Nations who is actually in charge of ocean. A few years ago, there was an initiative called under the Secretary General at that time, and he was initiating more cooperation across the UN bodies, and he called it UN Acting as One. And at that time, there was a UN Ocean activity, which was trying to connect the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, the WILOS, the Division for the Law of the Sea, the United Nations Environment Program, United Nations Human Development Program, then the maritime safety issues, and they were all supposed to be working together under this UN Ocean umbrella. But for some reason, that activity never got teeth. It's sort of still there on paper, but it's not acted upon. The president of the General Assembly, Mr. Thompson, he is interested in maybe even himself, when he's very much lobbying for a focal point at the United Nations level, one person, where all the ocean issues would be coming together and at least discussed. And as Martin Bohle was saying, helping with the lack of awareness for ocean and ocean issues, making them more prominent, more visible, and making them more coherent. So this issue about coherency and governance, and then acting on pieces of governance is really a challenge. And we have many regulations that are good in intent, but not acted upon. So what is needed in my mind is more connecting of the pieces and more interaction between them. Right now at the United Nations, they have been negotiating a new implementing agreement in the areas beyond national jurisdiction. And it is about many things, but it's also about the ability to maybe even take part of the global ocean and call it a protected zone, a marine protected area. Right now, the legal regime doesn't allow for that, and the implementing agreement is trying to do that. So there are moves afoot to get more coherence across the various actors, but it's not simple to do. It might be easier in the Cook Island. Maybe we can hear about the Cook Island as a small island state, whether it's easier to get ocean governance a bit more coherent there. But in large countries like Germany with complex ministries, in large structures like the European Union with complex arrangements, it's very hard to get all the ocean actors together. But I think hard doesn't mean impossible. So we've made some progress in Germany by getting the German ocean actors together in one room, and they said, oh, that's so exciting to be together once, we never meet. And I think having more meetings like that, you can get more coherence, you at least try to get more teeth behind the existing regulations, and I think that would be a good step forward. Okay, thank you. Michael, I'd like to go now to you, to the rest of the world, which is not part of a larger consortium of developed countries or more developed countries, with very real problems and different forms, if you want, of representation and governance. Tell us a little bit about your experiences with this.
Sure. Everything that we've just heard has been from the perspective of Western industrialized countries. So if you look at the world view of indigenous people, it's very different. And so for us, we are still a part of the ecosystem. So it's not something separate. So where I live, we're a subsistence culture. We're not a cash-based economy. So we get our daily resources directly from nature. And so what we're putting up with is climate change, acidification and pollution, and the shrinking size of fishes, for example. And then acidification in particular is now saying, okay, we'll also dissolve your coral reefs and the bivalve. So that's another huge problem. I noticed recently that there was something called UN DRIPS, which is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And that's recent, but when you read through that document, it suddenly says, indigenous people have rights, so they're traditional rights. How can we include that in, say, a fisheries agreement with a foreign, with a distant water fishing fleet? You know, so what about the people? And so another part of the way of life and the world view is we will close a fishery if we find the abundance or the quality of it coming down. We shut the fishery off, the harvest, we'll monitor it over a period of time. It's okay, we'll bring it back online and say okay, and we'll close it again. You know, as and when it's. The second thing, so it really comes to what Alan had said about how possible is it in the Cook Islands. So we are what we would call a large ocean state. We have 15 islands. The total land is 241 square kilometers, set in 2 million square kilometers of ocean. Okay, now for about 5 or 6 years, we've been trying to get this protected area up and running. So it started off as just a paper park. The 11th of July, just gone, they enacted what they call Marai Moana Act. And we had to fight very hard for that, but we've now managed to get 50 nautical mile buffer zones around each of the islands. And so I haven't got the latest version, because when that document went to Parliament to be approved, they made a couple of changes just to do with oversight. and who could actually feed into the steering committees for it. But basically, it was okay. You can have a 50 nautical mile zone where there's no commercial fishing, no deep sea bed mining. And then also the Act says you can include new areas and you can extend them with justification. So it's certainly possible. So we're sitting here, immediately up to the north of me is Kiribati. That's got 4 million square kilometers of ocean, very similar sort of situation, highly at risk from ocean acidification, and of course industrial fishery. Thanks.
Thank you. We have a question from Eva Lisa Fischer, and this picks up on something that Michael, we had spoken about recently. She says, how will our international trade system look like? Now, half of the, or more, 90% of the goods transported globally go via the ocean. And how will this change, considering that oil production will decrease, she says, from 30 GB, so giga barrels per year in 2012 to 15 in 2050, while human population goes up. So what are we going to do about this huge use of the ocean for global trade, and how will that impact protection measures that may be put in place? Michael, I'll turn to you.
Thank you. Yeah, one idea I had was because so much of the world trade goes by sea, and those shipping routes are often direct, so that they take a sort of port A to port B using a direct route. So if we wanted to have, say, 50% of the ocean as marine protected areas with no industrial activity in them whatsoever, it makes sense first to define the shipping routes and then build the MPAs around the outside of that. And then you can monitor that by satellite or whatever. But certainly if we got round or finished using fossil fuels, you get away from, say, super tankers, whose only job is to burn fossil fuel, to go and collect fossil fuel and take it someplace else. So if we sort of shift somehow to renewables, especially for transportation, then we can lose a large part of the carbon footprint from the oceans. Thanks. Okay.
Martin Visbeck, would you like to pick that up?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. Clearly, ocean transport more than 100 years ago was by sailing ships, and then by motorized vessels, today by container vessels, and these enormously large vessels are certainly a very economical way, and also in some ways energy efficient way to transport goods around the planet. So compare that to transportation by airplane or by trucks on land. It's the most economical way to move goods around. So I think that has to be clear, and it's also in that sense the most energy efficient way to do it. But on the other hand, quite often our economies are taking that into account, and there's a lot of transport of goods and materials across the oceans, which might not be that necessary. It just saves a little bit of money, but if you were using more locally grown food and we're maybe thinking about reducing some of the unnecessary productions, we could certainly reduce that. But I want to echo Michael's point. In some ways, shipping and the regulation of shipping is one of the huge success stories. If you look about the amount of oil spills that comes out of freighters or tankers, it used to be pretty bad in the 50s and 60s. It's gone to very, very, very small percentages by now. And that is thanks to United Nations IMO rules, which have certain building construction rules about tankers, about freighters, about their what is allowed to put in the ocean, what is not. And you know, they used to exchange the oils in the ocean 30 years ago. They don't do that anymore. So the shipping industry has really cleaned up their act in many ways. They're still producing a lot of CO2, and also many of them burn a lot of unhealthy oil that produces a lot of other pollutants in the atmosphere. But on the other hand, the shipping industry is in many ways the good one. But now, as we are thinking about marine protected areas, and in some areas we would really like to also not have commercial traffic go through them, there's two ways to go. On the one hand, you can say, okay, we know the shipping routes, so we just put the marine protected areas outside of them. That is a good idea where possible. but I'm afraid there might be some areas which are ecologically quite valuable to the ocean and to us as humans. So we might want to have a couple of routes changed. And there's regional organizations like OSPAR in the North Atlantic who has done that. There is a marine protected area in the area beyond national jurisdiction. And there's discussion about the Sargasso Sea, where they would also like to do a ban on shipping through that particular area. But I feel if you do it on a region by region basis, the globally running actors might say, well, now you managed to get shipping out of this area, and next thing I know, 80% of the ocean will be off limits for commercial shipping, and then they have to go large detours, which are going to cost more money. I don't think they want that. So I think if we had a global plan, I agree with Michael with that, because I'm pretty sure that the shipping companies and the IMO would be probably accepting to move 5 or 6 commercial routes out of certain areas with a little bit of detour. They might do that, but they don't want to do it with 80% of them. So I think if you had a global plan of what's needed, we could enter in such discussions and we could reduce that. At the same time, I do think that the types of ships we are building will change. There's already a move afoot to change some of the shipping lines to natural gas, LNG, as a way of providing the energy, and there might be other ways coming into the future as we learn how to produce energy in different ways. But in some ways, I will say that the shipping is noise pollution. I don't like that, but overall, they are certainly not the bad guys in the ocean system. They are not the main polluters. They fulfill a function that I think that we all benefit from. I think there's other areas in the marine system that where I would start thinking about regulations, because the marine shipping industry in general is quite regulated. It's not true for fisheries so much, and there are some black sheep, and this has to do with flag states and port control and things like that. But again, it's using the laws that we have, and then there's some member states or some UN nations who have very weak laws, and that's where the shipping companies register their ships. But even that could be changed in the way we do it usually, because when you go into port, it doesn't matter what flag you fly. You have to oblige to the restrictions or the rules that the port country or the state that you enter has. And if it has strict rules, then all the ships have the strict rules, and that was the way our shipping got cleaned up. So in many ways, that's one of the great success stories of United Nations regulations shipping. I think a bit more can be done, and I do think we're probably going to see potentially less number of ships, but more efficient ones. And I do think also that the energy propulsion systems might change as we see the whole fleet changes. Right now is a good time to think about that. Shipping is in deep crisis, a lot of overcapacity because it was seen as very profitable. So I think the shipping industry is trying to reinvent itself. Which way they want to go, we'll have to see. But I think it'd be unrealistic to think that it'll be a dramatic reduction of shipping, because that means dramatic reduction of international trade, which means we will be reducing the ability to participate in global markets. And I don't think most nations are too interested in that, never mind some protectionist activity that we hear.
Okay, thank you for that. I see that there have been some entries into the live chat. And I think before we go straight into what we really want to discuss, which is how do we take forward some of the dynamics that we've started up in the MOOC, which we have some interesting comments on. I'd like to just make one comment, and this is come across many times in the forum as well. We have a comment given in the forum. We as scientists and interested, I'm hesitant to say educated, but people who have access to the knowledge, we're a kind of an in-group. And the out-group is really the rest of the world that has perhaps different interests, might need a different kind of knowledge, a kind of support. And how would we reconcile the two? How do we know that what we're doing is actually relevant and interesting to the people who would use this for action? Martin Bohle, would you like to take that up? Do you have any ideas on that?
Thank you very much for this question, because this goes in a marine form to the heart of what in political spheres is labeled as science evidence-based policy making, or to put it simple, is at what moment in time it is best for science to speak up and tell the policymakers what is in know-how in this specific field. And there I think one has to face very bravely the initial which means normally when the scientists come and wish to tell something, it is the wrong moment. Listening audience are not to understand. Nobody in the end likes much to get told by somebody, by the way, you are not properly educated and you will get here a piece of know-how which you have to have. So it is a question how to move forward. And I think I personally look very much on experiences which have been done by the mitigation panel in the IPCC, where, for example, it's very interesting work from Kovac and Edenhofer, which analyze what are conditions that science advice is, and also bring it into context. There are so many other things in the world which is useful knowledge, which one has to be considered by policy. So it is not simple, bring the science to the people, and then they listen to, and then they implement these things right. This has to be done in a different concert. And quite normally, people, when they are in a moment that a decision has to be taken, what to do and what not to do, are quite more open to listen to the advice which they could get. And these are the moments which one has to size in order to come with the information forward which one has in hand. Is one of the elements. And this requires, to my understanding, a steady interaction between the science-producing sphere and the policy-making spheres. So a scientist who has done his project is ready with the results and then comes out of his corners and sells these results, has not learned the trade, how the policy-making is done. So the question is how to network from the beginning. Also could mean, has to mean in many things, to bring the other parties into the game, to listen what they take into consideration. What are their concerns? One could make a simple, no, not so simple examples. Think about shrimp farming, replacing tropical areas. We like to eat this food. They like to produce it because they get some income. They have some problems with shore defenses. You can make some economic models, and this was part of the course material that is not really beneficial, and so on and so far. So multiplayer of science, even going so far that the design of the research undertakings from the very beginning brings in the communities which you would like to get knowing of the results and make use of the results. That is the first element which I would like to add to this very difficult and very timely question.
Okay, thank you. Michael, let me go to you and ask you, from your experience in living, as you say, with nature in a small island state, in the middle of the Pacific with a lot of similar-minded people around you, what is the role of knowledge of the kind that we generate, or of any kind? What kind of knowledge is needed by whom for what kind of action? It's a difficult question, but what would your take be?
Okay, am I on? Yeah, one of the things is about making the information for the right target group. So in a traditional culture, they have what we call traditional wisdom and traditional practices. So traditional knowledge and ways of existing comfortably with the environment. What I find with modern science is I'm often able to explain how their traditional observations are underpinned by science. So, you know, what people learned over generations and handed down orally, I can say, yeah, modern science agrees with that. I'll give you an example as well. So it's partly about making what you're sending over as interesting and also relevant to the people that you're speaking with. So look at, say, climate change, sea turtles and the tortoises on land. The sex of the embryos is determined by temperature. So the incubation temperature in the nest. So what we have is more females from warmer eggs and more males from cooler eggs. Now, over the last 12, 15 years, is that populations of sea turtles around the world that have been well studied are becoming feminine. So it's more and more difficult to try and produce males. And so sooner or later, what you might find is that every nesting beach in the world is above this pivotal temperature. And so we would only have female turtles. Crocodiles and alligators, same technique, but the opposite way round. So they would only have male crocodiles. And so we think now is pretty good evidence that that was actually what caused the dinosaurs to become extinct. So after the Yucatan meteorite, the dust cloud all around the atmosphere, temperatures came down, and sooner or later, one sex or the other for the species would be what you're left with. Any help?
Thank you. I'm going to go straight to the forum because we've had a lot of wonderful comments there, and just pick up some. Shirley starts by saying, I'll just go through a couple of them and then we can pick them up. I'll ask Martin Visbeck to comment a bit. Shirley says, yes, I would like to see discussions and a sort of an alumni forum coming out of the MOOC. Thank you, Shirley. Of opportunities in the global as well as the regional level, where new and amateur oceanographers, I love that term, I wouldn't know where to put myself on that line, can find ways in. Ajitra says post-MOOC activities are pretty much needed. We need this network to be maintained either through forums or request webinars and activism in our own region. I think yes, very much. Online materials in the form of research papers, which are of common interest. So I think there's a lot of interest in keeping this synthesis of knowledge and information together. Policymakers, contact us with new developments, and community activists, people who depend on the ocean. And Eva Lisa comes in with a very nice comment. She says, at OceanMOOC, lawyers, judges, Ministry of Finance, multilateral development banks to get money for long-term biodiversity and conservation projects. Very ambitious, and thank you for your confidence in us, Eva Lisa. But yes, these are some of the people we need to network and keep this going. Martin, I'm going to go straight to you to pick that up, but also to ask, you've been part of many networks, internationally, nationally, with people from enormously different backgrounds. Tell us how you think it works best.
Yeah, so really wonderful questions and great comments that we certainly appreciate. And let me just try to answer them at different levels. At the first level is for the MOOC. So you as the MOOC cohort, and we indeed, Avan, the team, myself, we had discussions as recently as a week ago or 2 weeks ago about how we organize the follow-up. And we have 3 lines of avenues in mind. First is how can we keep in contact with all of you? And on the one hand, there is the oceanmooc.org website that will be live and there, and we will install some form of communication activity there. It could be a forum, it could be just a mailing list where you can post your ideas, invitations, conferences, activities, sort of call for engagement. So I think that really connects all of you and keeps a little bit of that momentum going. But I think I was very interested in some of the other comments which had to do with more regional or local engagement opportunities. And I think we hope that the MOOC, on the one hand, allows you to be more proficient on the issues, to be a force, a voice, a connector in your region, in your local region, your regional region. And we want to support you. On the one hand, all of the lectures, all of the MOOC material is always online. So all the YouTube videos are there for you to use. And our idea was really, when we produced the MOOC for a little bit of money, that this would be available to you. If you want to do a community project and you feel you need to educate you and your community on certain issues around the law of the sea, around mining, around fishing, around climate, about physics, biodiversity, you know, just go and pick up the 1 or 2 or 3 YouTube videos that you thought were helpful in that regard and show them. They're free for you to use. Or I myself at Kiel University am teaching a course on with ethicists and marine scientists, and I'm telling them, here's the MOOC, you can go and look at the MOOC, and then we do a project afterwards that synthesizes the knowledge around certain questions. So I'm using it myself as a teaching tool. So I think that's one thing that we offer to the global community. Here's a resource for you, use it in your local setting. The last question is certainly one that was about the networks, Avan. Indeed, there's quite a number of them out there at the very global level. I am part of SDSN, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, who is co-sponsoring this MOOC, who is giving us access to the EdCast platform for free. That's why the MOOC is for free for you, because SDSN is supporting that. And the Sustainable Development Solution Networks looks at sustainable solutions across the SDG spectrum, not just on ocean. There is a small group on ocean that might grow. If you're interested in being part of that, we can discuss and talk about that. There's another network which is a little bit more oriented on the research side of things. It's called Future Earth. And Future Earth is just setting up a new group. It's called the Knowledge for Action Network Ocean. This group will be becoming more operative in the next couple of months. There's a small scoping team set up as we speak. It'll be officially announced next week. And again, we're looking for your engagement and input to that group if you're interested in following through on some of these issues which have a global sort of footprint on that. But what we're really interested in supporting you at the local level, as Michael was saying. I mean, if you live in an island state like he does, and you have your view on the ocean is very different from that from Germany's, obviously. But at the same time, that is an important perspective. And I just wanted to mention, I didn't say in the beginning, the SDG 14, the ocean goal, did not come about because Germany wanted it or France wanted it or the United States. In fact, most of those OECD countries did not want a separate ocean goal. The SDG 14 is just the product of the small island development states, in particular the ones from the Pacific. They got together and said, in this SDG policy forum, we're gonna gang up and basically say, if there's no ocean goal, we will not support the whole agenda. And once they did that, and they have quite a few votes at the UN because there's many countries, the big nation says, oh yeah, ocean goal is very important, let's have one. And so I think you can see that small communities can make an impact, in particular when you connect, when you network, when you work together. So we would like to support you in this. And one of the actions that we're thinking about is setting up a group that we potentially will call a Young Ocean Leaders Group, Academy, whatever interest group. And we might organize a meeting for a couple of you for a month or two every year in different locations to think through some of these hard problems that you always wanted to solve but felt in your week of free time in the summer or doing in your institution you didn't have enough people that were helpful or thinking you. So we want to build a little bit the community of future ocean leaders, next generation, to really tackle these difficult challenges that we discussed before. So yes, we have quite a few things on our mind, but we are very interested in hearing from you what it is that you want from the global, say, ocean community. And again, we can bring this towards the SDSN group, we can bring it to the Future Earth Ocean Can group, and we can also just socialize it around our MOOC community in alumnus status. We do think you are MOOC alums by now, and we really want to use you as maybe even teachers for the next MOOC if we run it next year. So we have quite a few ideas about that. So stay tuned. We do have access to your email still. We might actually formalize that a bit more.
Thank you, Martin. That's a whole wonderful group of ideas. Michael, let me ask you, in your neck of the woods, how do you network with people around you? What is the role of education, of traditional knowledge, which I know is a very valuable and strong source of knowledge, and how do you spread knowledge, experience leading to action?
Okay, they're great questions. Thank you. One of the wonderful things about the South Pacific is so many people are related. So they have relatives on all different islands. So something happens, like we call the coconut telegraph, and then the next minute, someone from an island the other side of the Pacific says, "Oh, we just heard they're doing so and so. That's my cousin down there." And so it works really nicely. As far as formal education goes, so in the schools, I've just asked the school, the island school here, if we can do a science fair in like at the end of term 4, so in November. I did one 3 years ago that was about biodiversity, and each of the different classes went off and studied something. This time I've said I'd like it to be climate change. So I want the senior class to go and do like a carbon inventory of local government, the hospital, the school, the police, all the rest of it. We're 100% solar powered, by the way. So in 2015, New Zealand Aid built a solar array here. It took 10 weeks. It took us a week to offload from the container ship, but 10 weeks later it was online. And the other village right over the far side of the atoll has about 35 people. They've also got an array. So ours is 480 panels, theirs is 96. So I've just said, okay, the next class, the intermediate class, you can go and do household surveys and say, like, why are we having to bring a drum of gasoline from Auckland to Rarotonga on a ship, then up here on another ship, when we can have a solar powered outboard motor? So this is the way we're sort of starting to shift. So today, or yesterday and today, we have this sail freighter from Hawaii, Kauai, SV Kauai. Last time it came, it brought me a solar oven. And I went, wow. And this thing is like awesome. You just set the mirrors up, and it reaches 180 degrees Celsius on a good day. You know, so I'm just going, awesome, instead of having to import bottle gas. So the next thing that's happened, we started a community environmental society called Hakano Halalanga. I'm the president of it, and my role is really to represent us at the international level. Everybody else, including the chairman, all islanders. We're just starting a children's club, so for the 9-10-year-olds, something like that. And then a few months ago, there's a tertiary training institute down on Rarotonga, Cook Island Tertiary Training Institute, and they appointed me to set up, create, develop, and deliver tertiary education that's appropriate for our community. So pretty much we're sort of from the little kids right up to the sort of local government and all the rest of it. We also feed in all of our research data to regional facilities, OBIS CMAP, for example. So all our sea turtle data goes there. And then I send reports down to Rarotonga's Prime Minister's Office, Ministry of Marine Resources, National Environment Personnel, and advise local councillors. I think we have 4 councillors locally. And so we tried to get it right. And we were also the worst affected by climate change, so in the whole country. So the El Nino last year, all of our corals bleached, the entire 77 kilometres of the atoll, the outer reef, all of the coral heads, and 95% of the giant clams died. So it was just like for the same reason as the zooanthelle just bleached and gone. So we have traditional management, we close the harvest, but that doesn't stop the outside world from impacting on what we do. So it's a sort of, okay, hands tied, and that's where it is. But we have the interest, and we have a real sort of sacred duty of providing for people in the future. So that is a major, major thing, because you say, like, you wouldn't want people in 50 years' time to say, hey, why didn't you do anything about it? Why have you left us nothing to eat? So these are like real, very, very important things in these remote locations.
Wonderful, Michael. That's exciting. That's not just education. It is empowerment and learning from and with each other. And I certainly think something that enthused me greatly with the MOOC both times was how fluidly people from across the world came together and shared knowledge, experiences, anecdotes, thoughts. And I think this is something that with technology, we're all sitting here separated by the earth between us, and people from all over coming in. And I think if we can keep this up as an exchange, so people have their own experiences in many places, and by speaking to others, maybe if the next time we do something to call people in from across the world, this is what the digital world provides from us, in itself is empowering to speak with and to each other. I think we will go now into the last question. We're running out of time. We have another 4 minutes. So I'm just going to lean behind me and pick up the original artwork that we had made for the MOOC, and some of you will recognize this. This has been signed by the artist in South Africa, and really say, how do we think that each of us, but also how do we think that the MOOC and whatever dynamics we've generated could be part of the solution? Maybe this is a bit of a repeat, but if you could think a little bit of your favorite way that we might do it, and we have our participants online with their favorite ways, we could then proceed from there. I'll give Martin Visbeck last word. So Martin Bohle, could I ask you to pick that up?
Okay, what to do with this? What I could chip into the discussions, one of the things which I learned is you have in your environment where you are working day to day to put the subjects on the table. I discuss on the market, on the fish stand, whether the fish is big enough that it could reproduce, and if it's not, I would not like to buy it. I tell it that is. There is a small NGO called Mundus Maris, which I'm supporting, which organize school teams, for example, in Senegal, in Nigeria, at the coast to do the beach cleaning. I talk to my colleagues about ocean acidification and the problem around. And I talk about sea level rise when I'm at the shore and see that the constructions which are there be underwater by the end of the year. Century. So I think the first thing is we have to do it daily around us, and this is quite often very open and interested. And then there is the means which we have in hand should be used. This MOOC was the second one which I took from the first one by Jeffrey Sachs. There is a Facebook group on Facebook since 2 years where I regularly post things which I find with scientific background which could be interested for this. So outgoing, I think, is the first message to do, and not waiting that somebody comes to you to ask. And we are all sufficiently skillful, and we all have, in particular, when we talk about the marine, a fantastic to talk about with people. Strange environment which they do not do. They feel curious about it, and they react. If we then positively them also the message, it's not all doomed something, then we have done a big part of our job.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful, hopeful message to end on. Michael, let me go to you. You've already brought in a lot of what you are doing locally, but is there anything you'd like to add to that in terms of what you would like to see with this kind of online education format or anything else?
Yeah, one of the problems we have is low bandwidth, so slow connections. But the materials are wonderful. So all the YouTube stuff is excellent. So like you've already said, if it's appropriate, I use these things. So one I showed the other day to the school was about what if carbon dioxide was visible, 90-second video. And it was like, oh, this purple stuff everywhere. And you say, like, hey, look, these people in the cities, they can't breathe. Here we can breathe. And so we say, right, let's get out. A lot of the forest had fallen down. So from the climate change over the couple of years. And that gives us the resources. So it's like nature takes time. You get the young ones to plant a tree, for example. That's their tree. And they have an interest in it, saying, oh, yeah, it's really 2 meters high or whatever. And so keep the language appropriate and simple. So often I'll just draw pictures in the sand with a stick and say, right, this is what we're talking about here. Oh, yeah, of course. It's like whatever you need. So it's different if I'm talking to the Prime Minister, but if I'm talking to the kids, they're all around saying, oh, yeah, what if? And so for me, that's the real message. So keep MOOCs free as long as you can, because most people here don't have a bank account or credit cards or anything like that. And so, you know, they sort of struggle. There's a few government jobs like a power worker and a teacher, but it's like the money they get, they want to pay their phone bill or they want to pay their power bill or something like that. And occasionally to buy some cargo from it if a ship comes. So rice, flour, coffee, stuff like that. Most stuff we can get locally. If there was never another ship, so what? It really wouldn't make any difference. You know, so we've always got fish, we've got coconuts, we've got shellfish.
Well, thank you, Michael. That's great, and I think it's it's worth reminding everybody that all the materials we have are open source, so they don't belong to anybody. They belong to all of us jointly, and certainly we want everybody to use it as they wish. Martin, I'd like to give you the last word.
Well, not much to say. I think we covered a lot of ground also on this question and answer session. My wish is that the MOOC empowered you. It provided you with some optimism about the ocean in the future. It gave you some ideas on how to engage, how to be part of the turning of the tide message or turning the tide group. We hope that if you're a teacher or an educator, that you find that material interesting, that you can use it, that you also got introduced to the other resources that we've made available, the World Ocean Review and the Ocean Atlas as one examples that we have been producing. There's more out there. But I think it's really, think about, and put it in a very nice frame, you know, if the next generation looks at your generation or our generation and says, well, what did you do to make this place a better place or to preserve it as much as you can? So really take a hard look at that. And then I think from that, you get the right idea of what it is that you can do in your circles. And if we got that idea supported in yourself or some ideas growing, we are very happy. And if there is more that we can do to support you in your action, in your research, in your caring about the ocean, in your daily ocean education around you and your family, with your friends, at the work, we'd be very excited. So I think for us, it's if you're successful, we're successful. But if there's anything in particular that you have in mind, please don't hesitate to send us your comments or ideas or suggestions. On the bandwidth thing, Michael, I've coined this idea as the MOOC to go, where we might actually put the whole MOOC on a hard drive and make it and ship it to those people who want it shipped because bandwidth is an issue. So I think there are solutions to even these problems like that that we're thinking of, but that's just one of them. But if you have other ideas, concerns, and in particular, if you think we should rerun the MOOC next year, we want you to be very, very active in promoting it and having maybe local groups around it. That would be really, really exciting for us, having an international crew of MOOC scouts if that's something that interests you, please drop us a note. We'd be very, very eager to work with you in a year's time. And that's for me. So it was a great ride as it was last year, and I really want to thank everybody for joining today's Q&A session, but also the MOOC in general, providing your comments, your ideas, and also this round of ideas and discussion was wonderful. In particular, because Michael, that you bring in the perspective from an ocean-based country, where ocean is it almost, to a region where ocean is just a small part of what we do in our countries.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're just over time. Thank you for everybody listening in, for your questions online, for your involvement. A big thanks to Martin Bohle and, of course, Michael White from the Cook Islands. And we'll be on, on the forum and in the MOOC, and all of us together will be part of the solution. Bye for now.